Alright, quick build thoughts on a Poet's Pen Indigon Inquisitor for the 3.3 Incursion League update. Let's go. So, this was a build idea that I had thought about relatively early on during the Bestiary League, using Indigon in combination with Poet's Pen and Inquisitor, but I never actually got around to doing it during the league, and I ended up just testing this character that's currently on standard and transferred over a bunch of gear. And for those of you that might be familiar with the Indigon Poet's Pen Hierophant builds, since those have been quite popular, it's very similar to that one. The difference is Hierophant is basically higher defense, whereas the Inquisitor is higher damage output. And I was actually surprised at how little people I ever saw really putting together the setup on an Inquisitor. So real quick, just for the gear that I'm wearing right now, it's pretty basic stuff. It's nothing like amazing. The gear's solid, but, nothing unobtainable by any means. It's mostly just gear from my Indigon Essence Strain character that I'd played, and I transferred it all over. The only things that I changed out were the two weapons for Poet's Pen, and then one of my rings to get a Warlord's Mark on hit. So the gear's pretty easy to get overall, other than obviously the Indigon can be expensive if you're on hardcore. Getting a 6-link is going to be normal 6-link stuff, and Poet's Pens are probably going to be a little pricey early. But for as strong as the build is, it actually ends up being, I think, quite cheap. So I'm going to toss in this T16 map just to kind of show off how it works. And where I think the build really shines is at killing bosses, but the map clear isn't terrible since it is just a Poet's Pen, and you can do this with the body swap shenanigans if you're a fan of that. Personally, I don't actually care for the whole body swap too much. I have it set up right now just because I think it's what most people would go with. For bosses, I don't think you want it at all. But even for map clearing, instead of doing this whole just swap around, you can just have a... What I put here instead of body swap is I added Culling Strike to the Unearth. So it helps kill, especially bosses, a little bit more. But now I have to actually run around. But you'll see the damage is just fine anyway, thanks to the Indigon ramping things up. Since you don't really need your volatile dead dealing hundreds of thousands of damage against trash mobs in this way. I don't think this is really any slower, but it's a lot easier to play for me at least than the body swap, which feels quite clunky sometimes. But yeah, as you can see, it clears well enough. The volatiles hit really hard even without getting very much stacking going at all. And then once I get to the map boss over here, you'll see where the real fun begins. And then I'll probably go over why it does as much damage as it is able to do compared to what other classes might achieve. Just a real quick. Pop right into the boss room, get a little bit of pre-stack damage, get my Arcane Surge from my Immortal Call, and we're in. So you'll see he'll start getting chunked very, very quickly here. And I don't really lose any HP in the process. And it's what's makes this build really strong to me is not only is it super high burst because you can pre-stack your damage with the volatiles, but the just sustained DPS is also extremely high. So what makes this build as strong as it is? Why I think you can play this over the alternatives like Inquisitor or even Scion. So in most cases, what's at the core of all these Indigon builds is you're scaling your mana pool. You can see mine's super high, and you're scaling your mana regeneration to just fill it up extremely fast, because the more mana you're able to spend, the more stacks you're able to get out of the helmet, the more spell damage bonus you gain. And for most builds, you get, for your mana regeneration side of things, it has about it has 1.75% of your max mana per second. That's just the default regeneration. So you take that regeneration, you take the 1% from the Cloak of Defiance, so now you're at 2.75. You take an Arcane Surge Gem, which if you max it out, mine's not quite maxed out, we'll pretend it's maxed out, that gives you another 1%. So now you're at 3.75% base mana regeneration. And then throw on something like the Boot Enchant, where you get 2% if you've been hit. And you're sitting at pretty much just under 6. So for the sake of simplicity, we'll say you get 6% of your mana every second, and that's before things like mana regeneration modifiers. With the modifiers, it scales up very high, but the number you want to think about is that 6%, and that's what most classes get. That's what their base mana regeneration is. However, Inquisitor has very convenient node, Pious Path, with the Consecrated Ground, where you get 6% of max mana and energy shield per second while on Consecrated Ground. And you might notice that's the number we were just talking about, 6%. It literally doubles the amount of mana you regenerate while you're on Consecrated Ground, which just leads to more and more Indigon procs. So you can see really quickly if I just try to stack this up by attacking in place, nothing special going on. You're going to see I'm going to start running out of mana, and this Volatile Dead is capping out at around, I think it went up to about 60, 70k average damage. Where by contrast, if I start stacking up the same, and then I'm going to hit my Consecrated Ground Flask to let that extra regeneration kick in. And you can already see it doing a ton of work. And now I'm at about 130, 140, 150k, so it's doubling the damage. Effectively doubles the damage, and you can just melt pretty much any boss in the game. As well as having, between your life and your mana pool, assuming you have the mana there, with 40% MOM, you know, you're sitting at 8k plus total HP pool with massive amounts of mana regeneration. Decent, a little bit of health regen since you are almost always on Consecrated Ground. Because another side effect of this first node is when you get hit, you might make Consecrated Ground. When you kill enemies, it puts Consecrated Ground on them. Or when you hit a rare or unique monster, you have a 10% chance to create Consecrated Ground that goes underneath you. So that's the one that's good on bosses, is the 10% when you hit a rare or unique, because this build is just spamming hits nonstop. The Frenzy hits them, the Unearth hits them, all of the Volatiles hit them, so you pretty much have permanent Consecrated Ground against the bosses. And then so you have that for your health sustain, a little bit of life regeneration, and then the Life Leech from the Warlord's Mark. So at this point you're pretty much safe from most things that aren't one-shots, but then if you're able to get a Xerfes, which is going to be tough. I don't know how you'll be able to get it, if you'll be able to get it during the next league, since I believe Perandus is not available at all from Xana. But if you can get one of these, you put it in place of your life flask, and you start healing tens of thousands of life per second. It's just absurd. Now, for this build, I did a few Shapers on Standard with it. They were all super easy, no deaths, not even close a single time. I did one Uber Elder attempt, which I died once, and I think this setup isn't really geared good for Uber Elder, at least in a hardcore situation. It might be pretty consistently doable. The problem is, when you are spamming and you do run out of mana, you're a character that pretty much only has like 5k to 6k total health pool if you get hit at the wrong time, and it's just not worth that risk. So if you want to do something like Uber Elder on hardcore, I do think, however, you could take that fight on pretty easily with the Hierophant version of the build. But this one pretty much crushes it in terms of damage and speed everywhere else. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the build. It's pretty straightforward stuff. You just get your life and your mana regeneration everywhere. Once you have the Indigon, you're good to go. And you just kill everything. Yeah, thanks guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed yet another me rambling on about a random build. I will leave a link to my character profile for this character specifically in the description. I don't think I'll be moving any of the gear around past this anytime soon, so you should be able to just see everything here if you want to take a closer look at what's going on. And yeah, that's it. See you guys in the next video. Later.